In this lesson, we'll talk about using different strokes and alphas as we sculpt. So kind of starting where we left off, here is 10 began, with just the kind of basic structure. Now up to this point, we've been sculpting and just kind of building up these rough overall shapes. To get any sort of shape with the stroke that we're creating, as far as, you know, the detail, bumpy detail coming in on these rocks or some sort of cracks and things like that, we can start to integrate alphas into our workflow. So right now, the tip of our brush, or the end of our brush, is just kind of a sphere shape where we get this sort of raised look, and we can come in and create that. But if we were to go in and add an alpha, for instance, I can come in, select an alpha, and you can see we have a wide variety of alphas, just black and white maps. The black is interpreted as being transparent, so the white is where we would actually add the detail. And you can see there's a lot of different configurations here. So for instance, we could come in with, let's come in with something like this alpha 08. So now when we sculpt, it's going to use that alpha to actually sculpt out. So with this particular stroke, we've got dots, so it's going to lay down one of those alpha copies. You can see that there, and then as I stroke across, it's just kind of using that to sculpt across the surface. So we get something that looks like that, which may or may not be what you want. In order to change how your alpha is laid down onto the surface, you can change your stroke. So right now it's set to dots. Dots and freehand are going to be fairly similar, where we are laying down one copy and just dragging that along the surface. Okay, we can also lay down copies of this, and so if we go into stroke, there's a lot of functionality under the stroke palette. We can go into modifiers, and if we turn on roll and do the same thing here, you can see that this is actually acting sort of like a paint roller, and is actually rolling out the alpha rather than dragging it across the surface. And so that gives you a different effect, which may or may not be what you want. If you want to create a single copy of this alpha, you can go to drag rectangle, and this will actually just drag out a copy of this alpha and lay it down. So let me go ahead and increase the intensity here. We could come in and drag this down. Let me turn off roll here, and you can see that I can drag out a single copy of this based on the intensity. Right now it's being added to the surface, but if I were to go ahead and Z sub, it would be pushed into the surface. Now if we want to create kind of an overall bumpiness based on this alpha, and we want some overlap, and we want to just real quickly drop it on here, we can use something like color spray or spray. What spray will do is it'll come in and vary the placement, the scale. If you're painting, it'll vary the color, the flow, and then we can come in here and you can see very quickly add that onto the surface. Now that's a little bit too much, so we could take this down, maybe go to Z add, and then using the pen pressure, we can start to just real lightly paint on this bumpy texture. Now you do have to have your model at a high enough resolution to get that sort of a look. You want to have enough polygons in there and enough points to reflect the detail that you are creating, but what's doing is using a copy of this alpha and repeating it across the surface with varying strength and so forth, so that you get this sort of seamless, bumpy kind of a look. You could also start to add some cracks by coming in with the drag rectangle, and we could get sort of a cracked look here, and we could come in different areas, and let's go to Z sub, and we can start to drop these kind of cracks in here. Okay, so maybe the rock is a little bit cracked, so you can start to do that. Increase the intensity and maybe decrease that, and in certain areas come in and add cracks, so it's not all over the place, but just in certain areas. And this allows you to add that kind of high frequency detail as well. So you're going to come in and experiment with some of the different alphas. Get this alpha 58, and you can come in and drag across here to create some vertical lines, or you can come in with, let's say, freehand and start to cut in gouges in the base here, kind of rough that in. This would be good for, scratches, if you need to do some scratches, things like that. Okay, so your strokes and your alphas will work in conjunction to get this sort of high frequency detail. Okay, so make sure to check those out. You're going to use an alpha, and it's going to be applied based on the different stroke that you have. Drag dot also will allow you to just drag this across and place it. So it's very similar to the drag rectangle, except you're not dragging out. As soon as you click, it's there, and you just place it. Okay. Now, as we go through this process, another cool, since we want to create rocks here, another cool brush to use is crumple. And you can see some brushes automatically have particular strokes or particular alphas associated with them. So this one, we don't have an alpha associated with it. We'll turn off RGB. And I'm just going to go in here and I'm just going to drag kind of back and forth. And it creates this sort of creased, crumpled kind of a look, which is nice for the rock that we're trying to create. So I'm just kind of jiggling it back and forth. And I can kind of smooth a little of that detail back out if I want to and go back in. Once I get the rocky, crumpled look going, I can make my brush size a little bit smaller, come at it from a different angle. But you can see how this really nicely gets a sort of rocky look. Okay, if you get something that you don't quite like, you can come in and modify it a little bit. But I'm just going to come in here, do this kind of around the surface until I get kind of a crumpled look with it. And again, you want to have your resolution high enough to be able to withstand and take this detail. Okay, and then once you get that, you can start to come in with your other brushes. So now I can define the Damien standard brush. I can come in and define different areas that I want to be sort of inset here. If we have little cracks or bits coming down here, I can make some undercuts going under the rock and just make it a little bit more natural looking. If you want to use some reference, you can do that. You can kind of create little cracks along the sides here. Come in along here and create some cracks as well. Okay, same sort of thing up here. And then you can come in with, let's say, your standard brush. So B, S, and T. We'll get our drag rectangle, and let's get one of these sort of bumpy alphas. You can come in here and start to, let's do Z add, start to add a little bit of detail here. Make that a little bit more alien looking, maybe some of that round detail. We could also, just add some general bumpiness in areas. And if the resolution isn't adequate to get the detail that you're trying to get, you can always bump up that resolution a little bit. So, maybe here we're adding on top of it to where it's gonna get that little bit of bumpiness. Don't want to go too crazy with it. Just want to be very selective. And then maybe in this gully or in here, we can kind of subtract it down. So kind of use the same alpha, but now we're subtracting to create pits in the surface. And so we can just come in here and I'm just overlapping them over one another. You could also try to use your spray to come in, dial down the intensity a little bit. And you can start to see how those alphas and stencils work together. And just going back and forth with some of these brushes that we've been using. And you just want to start to define the rock a little bit more. You've already drawn out the main features. Now we're just emphasizing those, adding detail, coming around here maybe, and there's some kind of layers coming in around the rock. This outcropping here. All right, and again, just using, in this case, you can see that the Damien standard brush, which creates this kind of pinch, it's actually utilizing a special alpha, which has that really bright center. That's what's creating the tight pinch there. Okay, is that special alpha. Then we can come in and typically you want to change your brush back. I wouldn't necessarily want to use the damn standard brush with, change out the alpha on that. You would change over to your standard brush there. Okay, so create a little bit more detail coming in there. Maybe those scratches are a little bit too much, so we can real quickly come in and smooth it out. If you want to change the strength of your smooth, you hit Shift, to smooth that out, and you can see how this changes. And so I can take my intensity of my smooth down, holding down Shift and changing that intensity. Otherwise, you'll be changing the intensity of your brush rather than your brush modifier. So just keep that in mind. So I can come in now and sculpt that out. Okay, so what happens if there are areas on our model that we don't want to be affected by our sculpting? What can we do? Well, in the next lesson, we'll take a look at using masking to handle that, and then we'll move on to working with multiple subtools and continue on from there. So just have a little fun playing with some of the brushes and strokes and alphas that we talked about, creating your little rock base, and then we'll come in the next lesson and talk about masking. So we'll go ahead and do that next.